What if I told you there was a king so physically deformed that his own people swore, with trembling voices and wide eyes, that he had been cursed by the devil himself? Meet Charles II of Spain, a monarch whose appearance was so disturbing that even members of his own royal court whispered in the shadows. He is not human. Someone has bewitched him. They called him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. But here's the truth no one dared speak aloud. Charles was not cursed by supernatural forces. He was condemned by something far more sinister, his own royal bloodline. This is the story of how Europe's most powerful dynasty destroyed itself from within, generation after generation, until it produced a king so deformed that, when he finally died, his autopsy revealed horrors so grotesque they seemed to confirm every nightmare his subjects had whispered for decades. And if you're ready to dive into history's darkest secrets, the ones textbooks sweep under the rug, then hit the subscribe button, because we're only just beginning to unravel the disturbing truth behind royal power. 1. The jaw that couldn't close. When foreign ambassadors first met Charles II, many couldn't hide their shock. There before them stood the sovereign of the most powerful empire on earth, and he couldn't even close his mouth. His jaw protruded so far forward that his lips never touched, leaving his mouth permanently ajar, like a stuck door in an abandoned castle. This wasn't an accident of fate. It was the inevitable result of 2 centuries of the Habsburgs' darkest obsession, keeping their blood pure. They called it honor. In reality, it was genetic genocide. The Habsburgs had an iron rule: marry within the family. Always, cousins married cousins. Uncles were their own nieces. And over time, family trees became so tangled that a single person could be their own cousin. Not once, but multiple times over. Charles's parents, uncle and niece. His grandparents on both sides, also uncle and niece. Go back a few more generations, and you'll find that Charles II had less genetic diversity than a population isolated on a desert island for centuries. The result? What doctors call mandibular prognatism, but the world knew as the Habsburg jaw. Charles's lower jaw jutted forward with such violence that even when he tried to close his mouth, a gap wide enough to slide a silver coin remained. His upper teeth sat completely behind his lower ones, as if nature had given up trying to assemble him properly. Chewing? Impossible. Every meal became a humiliating ordeal. The royal kitchens had to turn everything into mush, puree, or thin broth, as if the king were a fragile infant. Even then, eating was a spectacle of suffering. Soup dripped from the corners of his mouth. Solid pieces simply fell into his lap, and servants constantly rushed in with towels to wipe the saliva dripping from the monarch's chin. But the worst part was his voice. His speech was nearly unintelligible. The same deformity that prevented him from eating also turned every royal decree into a wet, slurred, and confused murmur. Foreign diplomats needed interpreters, not because of language, but because they literally couldn't understand what the king was trying to say. Even his own courtiers struggled to decipher his words. Palace records reveal that his own mother, Queen Mariana, wrote desperate letters confessing her constant terror that her son might choke and suffocate on his own tongue while sleeping. Yes, the most powerful ruler in Europe was considered a choking hazard. And the most horrifying part? The Habsburgs knew. They knew their incestuous marriages were producing children increasingly deformed, frail, and sickly. But they kept doing it anyway. Because, to them, power mattered more than the pain of a human body. By the time Charles was born, he wasn't just a prince. He was a living experiment in what happens when human genetics collapse under the weight of pride and greed. 2. A body that defied nature. The Habsburg jaw was merely the tip of an iceberg of physical horrors. Charles II's entire body was such an extreme aberration that if a medieval peasant had seen him, they would have crossed themselves repeatedly and fled screaming. At age 35, Charles looked like a sickly child, stretched and twisted by invisible, cruel hands. He barely reached 1.50 meters tall, but it wasn't just his height that shocked. His proportions were all wrong. His head was disproportionately large, wobbling precariously on a neck, so weak it could barely support its own weight. His limbs were thin, trembling, almost too fragile for the skeleton that carried them. And that was only what could be seen on the outside. His limbs were stick-thin, nearly skeletal, while his torso was strangely compressed and hunched, as if a skeleton had been hastily assembled by shaking hands. Charles couldn't walk until he was 8 years old. Pause for a moment and think about that. Most children take their first steps around their first birthday. Charles spent nearly a full decade unable to support his own weight. And even when he finally managed to stand, it wasn't walking, it was desperate stumbling. Palace records describe him lurching from wall to wall, clutching furniture as if they were canes like a decrepit old man, despite being in the prime of youth. His spine was so severely curved that he seemed permanently stooped, carrying on his back not a crown, but an invisible burden. And in a way, that's exactly what he carried. The crushing weight of generations of incest, royal pride, and corrupted DNA, all concentrated into a single body, the body of a catastrophically unlucky man. But the damage didn't stop at his flesh. The mental effects were equally devastating. Charles had the intellectual capacity of a child. Even in adulthood, he didn't learn to read until age 10, and even then he struggled with the most basic concepts. Court tutors described trying to teach him as trying to fill a broken vessel. Information went in, but nothing stayed, nothing made sense. His emotional regulation was that of a child trapped in a king's body. Servants reported that he would fly into violent rages over absurdly simple things. A poorly served dish, a closed door, screaming and thrashing like a child denied a toy. These outbursts were followed by long periods of total apathy. He would sit motionless for hours, staring into the void, completely indifferent to the world around him, as if his mind had already fled that prison of flesh and bone. Even his hair betrayed his genetic ruin. It grew in thin, irregular, sparse patches, constantly falling out, until his scalp resembled that of a sick animal more than that of a monarch anointed by God. Court painters were forced to take creative liberties in official portraits, softening features, hiding deformities, inventing dignity where none existed. But even the most flattering art couldn't erase the truth. And the most disturbing part? Charles's condition worsened over time. While most humans reach physical maturity and stabilize, Charles's body was an accelerated collapse. His system failed faster than normal aging could explain. Doctors of the time had no words for what they saw. Here was a living man whose genetics had abandoned him, a body that seemed to be shutting down piece by piece, as if it knew it should never have existed. 3. The king who couldn't produce heirs. This is where Charles II's personal tragedy became a continental disaster. The most powerful throne in Europe, ruler of empires stretching from the Americas to Asia, belonged to a man biologically incapable of fulfilling the one function royalty demanded of him, producing an heir. Charles married twice in desperate attempts to save the dynasty. His first wife was Marie-Louise d'Orleans, a young, vibrant French princess who arrived in Spain dreaming of becoming queen and instead found a husband courtiers whispered barely looked like a man. Their wedding night was a disaster. Palace servants reported that Marie-Louise left the royal bedroom in tears, while Charles remained confused, anguished, unable to understand what had gone wrong, because the same mutations that twisted his jaw, curved his spine, and erased his mind had also destroyed his reproductive capacity. His sexual organs were so underdeveloped that contemporary doctors describe him as infantile. Charles effectively had the sexual maturity of a prepubescent boy, trapped in a body already condemned by time and heredity. But the court couldn't admit this. Instead, they blamed Marie-Louise. She was subjected to humiliating medical exams, forced to ingest foul herbal concoctions, endure painful procedures, and live under the relentless scrutiny of a court that needed, at any cost, an heir, even though the king himself was biologically incapable of producing one. The psychological toll was devastating. Marie Louise, once described as lively, intelligent, and full of life, became withdrawn, silent, consumed by depression. She spent her days on her knees in prayer, begging God for a miracle that science and nature had already denied. Some historians believe the very fertility treatments slowly poisoned her, a toxic mix of heavy metals, abortifacient herbs, and extreme stress. When she died mysteriously at age 26, never having conceived, her mourning lasted little. Charles remarried almost immediately, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess sent as the dynasty's last hope. But the second marriage was even more desperate. By then, Charles was in his 30s, and his body had deteriorated further. Maria Anna, in private letters that survived the centuries, confessed her horror upon first seeing her husband, and her growing certainty that bearing a child was impossible. The court, desperate, tried everything. They brought the best doctors from across Europe, consulted ancient fertility texts, dug into forgotten manuscripts, and when science failed, they even turned to magic. Charles was subjected to humiliating, grotesque, almost punitive examinations. Doctors prodded, measured, and manipulated his genitals with clinical coldness, trying to find some spark of functionality where none existed. But nothing worked, because the problem was never medical. It was genetic. It was inherited. It was irreversible. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe watched in silence. Everyone knew when Charles died without an heir, the Spanish throne would explode into chaos. France, Austria, England, all the great powers it claims, and all were ready to enforce them with cannons, swords, and armies. The War of the Spanish Succession was already simmering behind the scenes of diplomatic palaces, like a barrel of gunpowder, waiting only for the final spark, the inevitable death of Charles II. The irony is so cruel it borders on poetic. The Habsburg spent centuries obsessively controlling every marriage, every union, every drop of blood, to concentrate power in their veins, and in the end, their last king couldn't even consummate a marriage. The purity they so fiercely defended created a man so genetically damaged he couldn't fulfill the most basic biological function required of a monarch, producing a successor, for exorcisms in the royal palace. When medicine gave up, the Spanish court turned to the supernatural. What followed was one of the strangest, most disturbing and theatrical sequences in real history. Public exorcisms performed inside the royal palace itself, with the king as the star of a sacred horror spectacle. The church had a simple, direct, and terrifying explanation. Charles was possessed by demons. Father Froilan Diaz, the court's chief exorcist, declared that the king's body was inhabited by multiple evil spirits, placed there by witchcraft, perhaps even by foreign enemies, or vengeful souls of the Habsburg ancestors themselves. But here's where the story crosses into the macabre. These exorcisms weren't held in hidden chapels or secret chambers. They were grand theatrical productions, staged in the throne room, with nobles, ambassadors, and foreign dignitaries forced to watch as their king, weak, confused, trembling, writhed on a marble floor, moaning under the weight of Latin chants and sacred gestures. The ritual began with Father Diaz forcing Charles to drink holy water. In reality, a mixture of water, dust from sacred relics, and very likely ground human bone fragments, considered holy by the church. The king would immediately fall ill, vomiting, shaking, sometimes losing consciousness. But the priests interpreted this as a sign of victory. The demons are fighting the sacred. They're being cast out. The ceremonies lasted for hours. Charles, already debilitated, was subjected to physical assaults disguised as divine salvation. Crucifixes pressed hard against his skin until he screamed. Holy water thrown in his face like a jet of purification. Forced recitations of Latin prayers, a language he barely understood given his limited intellect. But the exorcists didn't stop with the king. Convinced the entire palace was cursed, they unleashed one of the most surreal episodes in real history. In 1698, Father Diaz ordered a total purification of the royal Alcazar, an operation that resembled half spring cleaning, half spiritual warfare. Servants were instructed to collect any object that might be contaminated by witchcraft, personal belongings of dead queens, gifts from foreign courts suspected of containing spells, even antique furniture considered portals to evil. Everything was dragged into the palace courtyard and burned in enormous bonfires, while priests chanted exorcisms in chorus as if expelling demons, not just from a man, but from the entire institution of monarchy. And the most tragic part? Charles believed it worked. His limited mind made him extremely suggestible. When priests told him demons were leaving, he felt relief, real or imagined, from his constant pain. This created a vicious, cruel cycle. Whenever his symptoms worsened, he begged for more exorcisms. The climax came in 1699, when Father Diaz triumphantly announced he had identified and expelled 47 distinct demons from Charles's body. Each had a name, personality, and specific function. One caused his deformed jaw, another his impotence, a third his confused mind. After this spiritual marathon, Charles fainted and didn't speak for 3 full days. The most painful truth? While the king endured medieval tortures disguised as divine healing, his body continued disintegrating from real diseases, illnesses 17th century science simply couldn't understand. 5. The autopsy that shocked Europe. When Charles II finally died in 1700 at age 38, the Spanish court faced a terrible and inevitable moment of truth. For decades, they had fed the legend that their king was El Hechizado, the bewitched victim of supernatural forces. But now, faced with his cold corpse, only one question remained. What had truly happened inside that broken body? What the royal physicians discovered during Charles II's autopsy was so horrifying that the official report was immediately suppressed, deemed too dangerous for public eyes. But, as always with the darkest secrets, details leaked. And when they did, they confirmed every fearful whisper of supernatural dread that subjects had repeated for decades. He wasn't human. Something about him was wrong, deeply wrong. The examination was conducted by Dr. Geronimo de la Fuente y Pirola, royal physician and unwilling witness, to one of the most horrifying medical documents in European history. In his report, he wrote something that would echo like a nightmare through the corridors of the continent's palaces. The body of Charles did not resemble that of a man, it resembled that of a monster. Organs so malformed, diseased, and degenerated that they defied the very logic of life. How had he survived at age 38? It was either an anatomical miracle or a biological curse. Let's start with the heart. Dr. Pirola described it as no larger than a walnut, wrinkled, blackened, resembling a piece of burnt meat. A normal adult heart weighs about 300 grams. Charles's? Less than 50. So small, so damaged that doctors couldn't understand how it had pumped blood for decades. His lungs were corroded, gangrenous, filled with fluid and decomposing tissue. The stench emanating from his chest cavity was so foul, so repulsive, that several assistants vomited or fled the room. But it was in the abdomen that the horrors reached their peak. His intestines were putrid, rotting from the inside while he still breathed. And his reproductive organs, the very organs that caused decades of political crisis, forced marriages, and accusations of sterility, were finally revealed in their tragic truth. Catastrophically underdeveloped, almost infantile, incapable of any reproductive function. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all was inside his skull. When they opened Charles's head, they found his brain floating in an abnormal amount of fluid, what we now call hydrocephalus. The brain tissue itself was discolored, damaged, almost spongy, explaining his intellectual disability, his fits of rage, his apathy, and his unintelligible speech. At the end of the report, Dr. Pirola wrote a sentence that shook Europe's courts. It is a miracle this body sustained life for so long, for it contained not a single healthy organ, The findings were so extreme that, instead of dispelling supernatural beliefs, they reinforced them. How could a man live with rotting organs, a heart the size of an olive, and a brain drowning in fluid? It must be the work of the devil or fate. But the truth was even more terrifying. There were no demons. There was only DNA. Charles II had lived 38 years dying slowly from the inside out. Each day a new silent collapse of a body that should never have functioned. His organism was a collection of failing systems, held together only by life's biological stubbornness, and perhaps by the force of the title imposed upon him. When he died without an heir, as everyone predicted, Europe exploded. The War of the Spanish Succession erupted, a continental bloodbath that lasted over a decade and killed hundreds of thousands, all because of a single broken body. The Habsburgs' obsession with blood purity didn't just destroy one man. It triggered one of the deadliest conflicts in European history. And the final irony is perfect, cruel, and absolute. A dynasty that spent centuries manipulating marriages, controlling bloodlines, and concentrating power, was annihilated not by armies, betrayals, or revolutions, but by a single biological fact. Their last king couldn't father a child. Charles II became living proof that the greatest enemy of absolute power is a rebellion. It's biology itself. Yet Charles II's legacy echoes to this day as a silent warning about the price of pride, of power, and of blood that refuses to mix. If these darker corners of real history fascinate you, where royal blood, science, superstition, and tragedy intertwine, then hit like. Subscribe for more stories that history tried to erase. And tell me in the comments, what other royal secret should I investigate next?